The grass type is a really interesting type. It has a lot of status effects, but they don't tend to be too widely used. In fact, when it comes to starters, I bet the grass type is probably the one's least picked. Well, I decided they needed a bit more love, so let's do a Hardcore Nuzlocke with them. Rules are on screen now and in the description. Pause if you need a minute to read, and we'll get on with the run. Since this is a grass type run, the moment we can pick our starter, we pick Trico, and we end up calling him Daisy. We go and do a bit more leveling just so we're not getting taken down to May. Level 8 was more than plenty enough, and we took that Torchic down with some ease. We then enter into the Pokemon laboratory, and May signals she's over here in an almost empty room.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
Now that we've got the obvious out the way, I decide it's time to do a bit of hunting, and I go and look for a Lotad. End up eventually finding it, catching it, and calling it Poppy. After that, we find out even though we are our dad's only son, he still doesn't love us as much as randomers, as he's allowed Wally to be given his Zigzagoon to go catch his first Pokemon. I had to save a man's life in order to get a Pokemon. Why does he have to do nothing? You're supposed to be my dad. We then managed to get in a forest where we go and catch ourselves a Shroomish. It was absolutely ridiculous looking around for this though. I found like 2 Slackoffs while looking for it, which is half the chance of getting one of them. Anyway, eventually we found it and we caught it. We ended up calling it Carnation, and now we can carry on to the first gym. Now, those of you who don't know, Roxanne's rock type, which happens to be weak to the grass type, so we just need to use a load of Mega Drains and we take her down. We then have to go rescue a little bird because apparently it can't just quickly fly away over the rocks behind it. We then run into Mr. Stone and he gives us this line.
I am the chosen one.
Yeah, that's kinda what they all say. At least on his adventure we get to go and soar the seas. And as you can see, this Wingull is quite nimble and could have easily gotten away from the Aquagrunt. On the way to the next gym, Daisy evolves into a Grovyle. And then we're ready to take on Brawly. Brawly's a fighting type leader, and that means all his Pokemon are very weak special defensively. This means with our newly evolved Grovyle, we are actually able to just spam Mega Drain and we take him out only losing half our health. We then end up seeing this mural of Kyogre on the wall, and it reminds me of something.
I'm acquiring Malagon!
Then my British heritage takes over as I see a Q and I have to wait. Poppy then ends up evolving into a Lombre. This grunt tells us then that he can't believe we beat the 27th best trainer. I suppose that means there's only 26 Aquagrunts that can take us down then.
Give us a kiss.
No Gulpin, get away from me. We then have the joy of doing another May fight and I start off with Carnation. I go for a Stun Spore, but it actually hits me first and activates my effect and puts itself to sleep, so my turn gets wasted. After that, I use Mega Drain, but it's not doing an awful lot, so I decide to throw a Leech Seed on it to quicken up taking it down. Eventually, we make it through it, and she sends out her Combusken. I can survive with one hit against this thing, so I decide to use a Leech Seed and then bring out Poppy. I get Poppy to use Fake Out on its first turn in, but then all I need to do is use a couple of bubbles and the Combusken's gone down. All that's left now is the Shroomish, but we've got an incredibly healthy Daisy in the back, so we bring it out, use a couple of Fury Cutters, and that's her taken down. We then end up running into an Oddish and we call it Rafflesia. We can head on a little bit further where we will run into and catch a Roselia. We give it the name Rose because look at it. And then with all that done, we can head on to take on Watson. He starts off with Magnemite as I start off with Daisy, and then I use a power-up punch as it uses a Thunder Wave. Thankfully, I've equipped a Berry, so I get rid of the paralysis and then I can take it out with one more power-up punch. He then decides to send out his Magneton, but this thing really can't do anything against it, and it's just another 2 power-up punches, and it's gone. After that, all he's got in his back pocket is his Voltorb, and that goes down as quickly as the last 2. We then have May show us Mount Chimney, and she describes it very weirdly. Like, have you never heard of a volcano before? We then find out from a May that a scientist is missing, and his wife looks extremely happy for this happening. On our way to rescue him, Carnation finally evolves into Breloom, and Rafflesia evolves into a Gloom. We then have to grab our Thesaurus as Maxie decides to speak. Thankfully, it doesn't take long for us to make our way to Archie. He starts off with Mighty Enna, so I use a power-up punch as he uses a Swagger to confuse us. Unfortunately, I put a Berry on, and this means by the time I've taken it out, I'm +4 on attack. Now, +4 attack on a Grovyle at this point is pretty strong, so all we need to do is Leaf Blade the Sharpedo, and once the Golbat comes out, use a Rock Tomb to take that out. Now we've gone through the water, we head into the fire. That's right, it's time for Flannery. I decide to start off with my Lombre as she starts off with her Slugma. Unfortunately for the Slugma, it can be taken down in one Bubble Beam. The Torkoal then comes out and it gets knocked incredibly low with a Bubble Beam, but it does set up a Sunny Day, meaning we'll do less damage and he'll do more. She heals it up with a Hyper Potion, so we use another Bubble Beam, but as you can see, it really didn't do much. She then goes for Overheat, which very nearly takes us out, but fortunately for us, it didn't, so we can use one more Bubble Beam and take her down. The last thing left is a Numel though, and that thing's 4 times weak, so even with the sun up, it goes down in 1. With Flannery down, we can now head into the desert and we discover a root fossil. Immediately we go and revive it in Rustboro and we get Lily the Lily. Next up, we've got to fight our father in Norman. I use a bulk up as he uses a yawn, and I decide at this point I should probably switch out. I send Rose out as it's got the ability to put the Slaking to sleep. Thankfully, it does manage just this. Unfortunately though, we actually only get 1 turn before it wakes up. Now, we do manage to get 3 bulk ups up before we do fall asleep, so I decide we're just going to stay in as it's not going to be able to do major damage to us. The moment I wake up, I get off 1 more bulk up, and then I finish the Slaking off with a Force Palm. Vigoroth can't touch us at this point, so a Force Palm takes that down. Then the final Slaking comes out, and it does hit us for some incredible damage, but we had raised our defense, so it doesn't end up taking us out, and I can one-shot it. After this, we go and stand on our lily pad and attempt to surf. After drying off a little, we end up running into Steven. His buddy Latios comes over and tells us that Latias is in trouble and he wants us to help. I then get a decent look at the guy trying to kidnap Latias, and he's wearing some weird helmet thing that straps to his chin. Really odd look that. Anyway, we take them down easy enough, and then we discover Latias is actually like a jealous girlfriend. It won't let us leave without coming with us. Come on, you're not a grass type, leave me alone. I then end up running into a Tropius, catching it and calling it Azalea. After this, I go into a weather institute where they've got a bed for me. Why would they have 2 beds at the bottom of this place? Who is sleeping here? After this, we have another May fight and I start off with Daisy. Obviously, it takes the Whalmer down in 1 and then the Combustion comes out. Since it's raining, I decide I kind of want to try Sweep, but unfortunately I end up missing 2 of my slams. This means I have no choice but to bring Poppy out and then use that to take down the Combustion. When the Shroomish comes out, I decide to bring Rafflesia in and I decide to give it the Towley treatment.
You want to get high? No, we don't want to get high. Okay.
Fortunately, that works and we take her down. I then decide to grab my Gloom, throw a stone into it and evolve it into a Vileplume. We then have a small encounter with Steven where he gives us the Sceptile. Not that I'm able to use it yet though. Anyway, with that done, we now have the hardest gym coming up, and that's Winona and her flying types. She starts off with Swellow and I start off with Lily. She gets 2 double teams off as I miss 2 ancient powers. Thankfully, by the time we get to the 3rd one, we do hit her and we get an Omniboost. You can see from my face here, I was actually a bit surprised by that. Now, the plan was, when the Skarmory came out, we were going to switch into Vileplume as I've EV trained it in both defenses and HP. We could then put it to sleep, set up a Leech Seed, and just chip away at it. But because we got the Omni Boost, we're actually good to take down the Skarmory using Lily still. And then we even have enough health left to be able to take down the threat that is Altaria afterwards. Again, that was going to be Sleep, Moonlight, and Leech Seed to give us that victory, but it saves us a trouble. Unfortunately, when the Pelipper comes out, we're actually too low to stay in, so I just bring Rafflesia in. And then I use the strategy that I planned on using all along. I put it to sleep, I use Acid on it, and then whenever I get low on health, I Moonlight to get myself back up there. It ends up working out fantastically, and because we'd managed to use the XP share to get all our Pokemon up to level 36 after that, Daisy actually evolves into Sceptile after this. I then make a little bit of a mistake, and I actually run into the Mayfight forgetting it was there in Slateport City. This meant I actually started with Daisy instead of Lily, but I just switch in and it uses Double Team. Doesn't end up affecting us though as we hit the next move. Obviously, Ancient Power is going to one-shot it, and then she sends out her Wailord. This thing isn't really going to do much to us if I bring in Daisy, so I do bring it in. I then get to use Mega Sceptile for the first time and sweep it down with a Leaf Blade. She then sends out her Blaziken, so I decide that I'm going to bring in Poppy. Poppy uses a Fake Out on the first turn and then finishes it off with a Surf. After this, all that's left is the Breloom, and I decide it's time to bring Azalea in for the first time. It uses a Fly against it, but unfortunately I didn't level it up enough, so it survives on a Slither. Doesn't really matter though, as she doesn't heal it up, so I can just hit it with any move on the next turn and it goes down and wins us the battle. We then climb Mount Pyre for Archie to just say yo as we get to the top. He's almost acting as if we're the police and he's just stolen something. Well, I saw that and you're going to jail. We progress a little bit further and our Lily evolves into Cradily. We then see Captain Stern giving an announcement to the news, and Team Aqua shout out as they steal the submarine.
You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of.
We end up infiltrating their base and catching up with them, and they somehow have had time to do an entire makeover of this submarine. Also, dressing it up as a Sharpedo, what are they thinking? It's just going to make it stand out like a sore thumb. They'll be sailing under the ocean and the cops will come and get them. Well, anyway, before we go any further, we need to take down the hardest gym leaders in this game, Tate and Liza. We then exit the gym, and Steven says he somehow heard from Tate and Liza we beat their gym. We've literally just left and they didn't come out before us. How could you know that? It is then sombrero time. After we've had that festive time, we then have to go and take down Archie. Against the Mighty Enna, I start off with Daisy and I Mega Evolve as I take it down with 2 power-up punches, but it does lower our speed with a scary face. At +2, the Muck does go down to 1 Dual Chop, and so does the Crobat. Unfortunately for us though, the Crobat does manage to hit an Acrobatics. This does major damage, and it actually means that we can't stay in against the Sharpedo because we've already had our speed lowered, therefore we won't hit first. I bring out Poppy just so he can get a little bit of chip damage by using a fake out against the Sharpedo, but he definitely can't take another hit from it, so we have to switch again. I go for Lily, but it turns out it can't take more than 2 hits, and therefore we need to be really careful with it. After that, I go for Rafflesia as it can actually survive 2 hits from it, and get a Sleep Powder off to put him to sleep. This gives us time to use 2 Mega Drains which take it out. Yeah, we were chancing sacking it on the sleep, but we could have just brought in Sceptile after that and we'd be swept from there on. Kyogre then rises up from the depths and brings a bit of my hometown into the world. We then run into Steven and Wallace, and Steven thinks the world is being washed away. This is bloody barbecue weather where I'm from. Anyway, they're all too scared to fight the Kyogre, so I have to go in there with my team of grass types. I decide to start off with Daisy, and I decide not to Mega Evolve so we're not 4 times weak to an Ice Beam. Not that it matters though, as Leaf Blade finally gets the crit that it deserves, and we take it down in 1. However, Kyogre must have been on a 25 kill streak.
Tactical nuke incoming!
Thankfully, we all managed to survive the blast, and we can enjoy a day in sunshine. We get given the Eon Flute, so we can actually get rid of Azalea and bring Rose back in. As a sorry, we give her a shiny stone, and she evolves. Now we have the final gym battle to do, and that is the gym battle against Wallace. I start off with Rafflesia, and because we get immobilized and confused, this Love Disc actually puts up a bit of a challenge against us. Like, this thing knocks me to less than half health, therefore I decide it's best just to bring Rose out. It gets off 1 growth, but it does get confused during that. I then use a Magical Leaf and take down the Love Disc. After that, he ends up bringing out his Milotip. Unfortunately for me though, on the turn it comes in, I actually hit myself in confusion, meaning I take some damage and then it hits us with an Ice Beam. Fortunately though, on the very next turn we get cured from the confusion and can take it out. And because we managed to set that growth off, we managed to one-shot the rest of his team using Magical Leaves. We then travel on a little further because we have to battle Wally. He starts with Altaria and I start with Daisy, who Mega Evolves and takes the Altaria down using 1 Dual Chop. The Delcatty then comes out, but we know Power Up Punch, so we use that twice and that takes that down. Then comes out his Magneton, and it gives us 2 opportunities to set up some Power Up Punches as it actually holds on with Sturdy. Roselia really can't do anything, and it only takes us half of the Dual Chop to take it out. Then he ends up sending out his Gallade. Now, with Gallade, I actually did my calcs wrong and thought I was slower than it. This meant I actually chose to switch out, and I chose Lily to switch into. I did this because I know it wasn't likely to be taken out and it would force it into using a fighting move against me so I could switch Rose in. Unfortunately though, the close combat he does use as I switch Rose in does a lot more damage than I anticipated, and I actually forgot to put a Citrus Berry on it. This meant that I couldn't take another hit from it, therefore I couldn't get my Shadow Ball off to finish it. I then end up sending out Lily, but it turns out that was a massive mistake as he goes for Swords Dance. Since Rafflesia has a lot of defense put into it, I actually decide to bring it out, but even that can't withstand a Swords Dance attack. I then decide to bring in Poppy, but at this point I'm just cycling through all of my Pokemon. Because Poppy's out, he shouldn't go for a Psycho Cut, so it's safe to bring my Breloom in. Unfortunately, my health was low enough where he does actually end up using Psycho Cut, and to put some salt in the wound, it ends up being a crit. Obviously, Breloom being fighting type, there is no chance he survived this. I then decide to look back at my calculator, and I notice I've not put my speed EVs and IVs on my Daisy. Turns out I'm actually quite a bit faster than this, so this was all for nothing. All he has to do is come in and use one Dual Chop, and the Gallade goes down. That death was completely brutal and absolutely my fault. Like, there's no excuse for it. I should have just swept with Daisy from the get-go. Because of that heavy loss though, I decide it's finally time to go and get our last encounter, being a Cacnea. I catch it and call it the obvious Cactus. And obviously we've got to get him up to the level cap, so we very quickly evolve him into a Cacturn. With that, we've actually got our team ready and we can go and take on the Elite Four. The first one of them being Sydney. Against Sydney, I decide to start off with Daisy, and I just use Power Up Punch as he uses Swagger on me. Thankfully, I had a Berry on to cure this confusion, and that means I can take the Mightyena down on the next turn with another Power Up Punch. This puts us at +4, and we manage to take down all of his Pokemon up until Cacturn in one hit. The Cacturn, we have to make a slight adjustment to the strategy. It knows Spiky Shield, so I decide to go for a Detect. That way we won't get damage from the Spiky Shield and can just take it down on the next turn. Quite an easy battle if I do say so myself. Next up, we have to take on the Ghost-type Elite Four member, Phoebe. Phoebe sends out Dusclops as I send out Rose. I use a Shadow Ball against it, which knocks it low as it uses a Confuse Ray. Unfortunately, I'd actually forgot to equip my Berry, therefore what I needed to do was switch out so I don't hit myself in confusion. I choose Rafflesia as it can put it to sleep, giving us a free switch in. Never mind, the moment I go to do anything with Rose, it wakes up again. Therefore, I decide to try and repeat exactly what just happened. And thankfully, it does stay asleep, but I do take some pretty severe damage from the Future Sight it used earlier. This meant we were free to set up a growth with Rose. And then, because I taught it Shadow Ball, we take down every single one of her Pokemon in one hit. Would have been a lot smoother, I wouldn't have even needed to switch had I remembered to equip the Berry, but hey ho, it worked out in the end. Next up is the Glacier Battle, which is actually pretty scary for grass types. And I actually set up with the wrong Pokemon. I was supposed to put Daisy at the front, but unfortunately for me, I actually put Rose at the front instead. I decide I need to try and get a free switch in, so I use Grass Whistle. Unfortunately, I miss, but all it does is set up a light screen. I then know it's likely to use Hail, so I decide to go for another Grass Whistle. This time, this one hits. This means I get a switch into Daisy for free. However, this will play out exactly the same as if I had him at the start, because what actually happens is it wakes up on the next turn. All it takes for this Glalie to go down, though, is 3 Power-Up Punches. We then have Frostlass, who's a Ghost type, so he can't hit with Power-Up Punch, therefore we use Leaf Blade instead. That's a one-shot too, though. Second Frostlass, exactly the same as the first. Walrein, as beefy as it is, when we're at +3 and we're using a Leaf Blade, it doesn't stand a chance. Then all that's left is a final Glalie, but thankfully at this point, 1 Power-Up Punch is a one-shot. Even though I messed up, that went incredibly smoothly, and I'm very surprised in myself. With that done though, it does mean we have to take on the final Elite Four member, being Drake. Now, before I actually started this, I equipped the Wide Lens to my Daisy. That meant Dual Chop had 99% accuracy, meaning it basically cannot miss. He does start off with his Altaria, but I decide I'm just going to use some Power-Up Punches up on it until I get enough attack. It used Cotton Guard, and then it took us low with an Aerial Ace, so that meant I needed to switch to Dual Chop. Because it raised its defense so much with Cotton Guard, it does actually take us 2 of these to take it down. However, unfortunately for him, his Kingdra isn't as lucky, and it takes us 1 to take that out. He then brings out his Flygon, but that follows the exact same fate as the last 2. And then he brings his Salamence out. I go for 1 Dual Chop and take it. It survived. Oh my god. Yep, I forgot to account for the Intimidate when I did the calculations. Therefore, Salamence isn't a one-shot, and it finishes us off with 1 Dragon Rush. It could have missed the Dragon Rush. That would have been so much better. Thankfully, Salamence is a flying type, and we've got Lily and its Ancient Power in the back. He uses a full restore, but since it only takes 2 Ancient Powers to take it down anyway, it really makes no difference to us. However, this Flygon could do quite a bit of damage to us, so I bring in Poppy. Unfortunately, he decided he was going for a Confuse Ray, so I decided to bring Cactus in so I can get a bit of chip damage with a Sucker Punch. In hindsight, the play here would have probably been to use Cotton Spore instead, but obviously I didn't think of that at the time. I then bring Poppy back out and I use a Fake Out on the turn that I come in before going for a Surf. Unfortunately though, we were confused on the switching and did hit ourselves instead. Thankfully for us though, that doesn't end up sticking too much, therefore all we need to end up doing is using a few more Surfs and we take it down without dying ourselves. All of that could have been avoided if I had have just done one more power-up punch, genuinely. And now we've got to face Steven without Sceptile. That's pretty scary, I'm not gonna lie. I start off with Rose against this Skarmory, and I expect it to try set up on us, so I use a Growth. Unfortunately though, it ends up going for an Aerial Ace, and this means I can hit it with a Shadow Ball and knock it to its sturdy, but I will be taken down on the turn after. The only other Pokemon that's capable of taking this out is Lily, but it will take some severe damage from a Steel Wing before it does that. Next up, he sends out his Aggron, and he does miss his first Iron Tail as we hit an Energy Ball, but we don't get as lucky on the second turn. Obviously, Aggron's pretty powerful, so this takes us out, but it does give us a free switch into Poppy, and therefore the Aggron will go down to 1 Surf. He then sends in his Cradily, and Poppy's not going to be able to take it out in 1, therefore I decide to bring Cactus out and use Sucker Punch to get some decent chip on it. Unfortunately though, it does take us down in 2 shots, therefore we have to sack yet another Pokemon. And then I just choose to bring Rafflesia in, and I'm hoping that I can get a Poison with my Acid. Unfortunately though, that never happens, and I get confused, meaning a lot of the chip damage that we should be getting actually isn't happening. Then, on top of all of that, he gets an Omni Boost with one of his Ancient Powers. And then, because he's got us confused, we end up hitting ourselves, meaning we cannot heal, and it frees him up to take us down on the next turn. Poppy's our last Pokemon and gets a little bit of chip with the Fake Out before having to take it down with a couple of Surfs. But at this point, we are at half health, which is terrible. His next Pokemon is Armaldo, and Surf is super effective against it, so we don't need to worry about it. And then he sends out his Claydol. Now, this thing is actually 2 hits with Surf, but it only sets up a Reflect, which really doesn't matter for a Pokemon that we're using, because we're only using Special Attack. He then sends out his Metagross, and we have a half health Poppy left, so I think you know exactly how this goes. We get Giga Impacted, and you get to see the face of defeat. All this way for us to lose at the very last hurdle. And I honestly believe if we would have had Sceptile in the back, we would have swept. Unfortunately, that means we've got to end this video on a sad note. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed and have a nice day.